asked to meet an unbeaten team from Stanford University. The postseason game was held in Pasadena. It was the first Rose Bowl game, and it was a real slaughter. Michigan 49, Stanford 0. Then along came Mr. Pop Warner, one of football's most brilliant minds. In 1895, at Georgia, he started a coaching career that spanned 41 active years. By the turn of the century, he was head coach and athletic director at Carlisle, a government Indian school in Pennsylvania, coaching a fantastic youngster who could do absolutely no wrong on a football field. His name, Jim Thorpe. Suddenly, little-known Carlisle started knocking off athletic joints like Harvard, and Glenn Warner became the most famous coach of his day. Pop Warner invented the single wing, famous for its power and in sweeps to the strong side. When the defense caught up with the single wing, Coach Warner's fine imagination enabled him to give birth to the double wing formation, from which he ran reverses and fake reverses without the loss of pure power. Like Mr. Stagg, Pop Warner became a legend in his own time. The legend lives on today, with thousands of boys learning football in the Pop Warner leagues all across our wonderful land. Another innovator was Bob Zupke of Illinois. Zup was called the Little Dutchman. He came to Illinois in 1914 and is famed for at least 2 achievements. Though others have laid claim to it, Zupke was first to employ a huddle to call plays. This was way back in 1921. And in 1923, the most famous player he ever produced, the incredible Red Grange. No player of the time was more deserving of publicity than Harold Red Grange of Illinois. The newspapers christened him the Galloping Ghost. Red Grange earned all the praise he got. He was one of the greatest football players that ever came along. In 1913, Notre Dame was practically unknown. They played football all right, but so did other schools, bigger ones. Still, in 1913, Notre Dame had a quarterback named Gus DeRay and an end named Knute Rockne. In the fall, Notre Dame went up the Hudson to play West Point for the first time. The Army expected a soft touch. After 60 wild minutes of football, the score was Notre Dame 35, Army 13. Thanks to Rockne and DeRay, the forward pass had finally arrived. After graduation, he taught science for a year at Notre Dame. But by 1915, he was an assistant coach, and 3 years later became head football coach at his alma mater. Soon, football was reacting to a Knute Rockne refinement, the Notre Dame ship, a rhythmic move from the regular T into a box formation. The effect was to throw the opposing line off balance, confuse them, not let them know where the attack was coming from or where to defend. Opposing coaches called it absolutely outrageous, unfair. Pop Warner called it the chorus line. In 1922, the 4 horsemen, quarterback Harry Stuhldreher, fullback Elmer Layden, left halfback Jim Crowley, right halfback Don Miller, capture the public's imagination. That was one of the finest teams ever blended together. They were called Rockne's Ramblers, and in 1924 were untied, undefeated. They met Pop Warner's champs from Stanford University and won the game 27-10. In Notre Dame's one and only trip to a postseason game, the Rose Bowl. In the last half of the 20s, boys from all over the country were eager to matriculate at the University of Notre Dame, including a rather undistinguished tackle named Francis William Leahy.
Get that tackle alone. McMahon, you use the camel block in the guard. And Metzger, you pull out. And use the holding block in the center. You plug the gap there, Tom. And Cochran, you trail us there from behind here. You start along the line of scrimmage here, Leahy, so he can't come through for the secondary. You go right through for the secondary right away. Square. Angle play. All right, Crispin. Hit the defensive fullback. Let that all clear, man. All set? All right, let's go here.
Rock was fantastic on the practice field. He could be extremely complimentary, and 10 seconds later, he'd be saying the most sarcastic, cutting words I'd ever heard.
Hey. I guess that fellow didn't know who you were, huh? All Indiana halfback. The next time he comes by, he won't dare run by. He'll just show me your clippings. Let's try that again and see if you can't do something. All right, come on, let's go here. All right, let's go. Come on, baby. All right, see you show some now. Put that stuff on reel. Let's go here.
Signal. 89, 42, 21.
Hip. 1, 2, 3. Hip. All right, come on, baby. Get up, come on. Oh, that's the way. That's the way to get him. Now, that's something like it. All right, now we're getting warmed up here.
Fortunately, he was a great psychologist. He knew just exactly when to criticize and when to encourage.
And then when we're playing, let's have a lot of fun out of it. Let's come out here and enjoy it. I want you to play football because you like it. If there's any fella here who doesn't like football, I want him to turn in the suit and get away because he's wasting his time. Well, let's try 92 here.
Signal. 86, 94, 51. Hip. 1, 2, 3. Hip.
One low. Oh, too high, Metzger, too high. And you didn't get that man out there, Leahy. Get your head on the inside of him, Frank. Carry him out.
1928 was Rock's worst season. But in 1929 and 30, Notre Dame was back in stride. Once again, the Fighting Irish were unbeatable. Yet, what didn't happen on the gridiron was taking place in the Rules Committee. For bit by bit, the powers that be were attempting to destroy the Notre Dame ship, and Rock didn't like it.
Without the shift, we would never have had the 4 horsemen in football. They averaged in weight 157 pounds. The shift enabled them to use their speed and their intelligence and their ability to finesse the other fella. Now they're legislating against the shift. They're talking about momentum. But every year they want to slow the shift up slower and slower and slower, which in my opinion is absolutely ridiculous. Whether a referee counts 6 or whether he counts 20, the question simmers down to this. Is there any unfair advantage? And in my opinion, if a shifting team stops for 1 second, that's long enough for anybody except the stupid defensive team, and football wasn't made for any defensive teams. However, if they abolish the shift, I'll change my type of player from the intelligent, smart, trim ankles player that's a 4 horseman, and I'll go in for the cow-minded, hippopotamus chassis type that so many schools use now. And so when you see a football picture of the Notre Dame team about 4 years from now, you will notice the bovine expressions and the ox-knuckle ankles predominating. And the fellow with the mustache doing his best to exude an aroma of strategic cunning, that'll be me.
Though none of us would have believed it, 1930 was to be Rock's last season. Within weeks after the final game, Knute Rockne was dead, victim of an airplane accident. He was barely 42 years of age. Hit by more and more schools. There was the Iron Major, Frank Cavanaugh, who left his mark on 3 great schools, Boston College, Dartmouth, and Fordham. From Michigan, another great offensive coach, Fritz Chrysler. He served a long apprenticeship, 8 years with Alonzo Stagg, and he learned his lessons well. At Minnesota, Coach Bernie Bierman with 4 national championship teams to his credit. This was football at its best in the 30s, but there was a coach who thought it could be improved. His name was Clark Shaughnessy. Thanks to him, the modern T formation came into college football. Even while Shaughnessy was still head coach at Chicago University, he worked constantly with the coaching staff of the Chicago Bears professional football team, helping them refine their T attack. In the 30s, the Bears had improved their T by adding the man in motion. That moving man opened up the enemy's defense. He was a decoy or a pass target. But either way, the opponent had to spread in order to cover him. When Shaughnessy went west, the T went with him. The year before, Stanford had been unable to win a single conference game. But in 1940, they had the modern T formation. Shaughnessy really built a machine. His Stanford backfield was comprised of Frankie Albert at quarterback, Pete Kometovic at one halfback, Hugh Gallerno at the other, and Norm Standley at fullback. He was a great one. He weighed close to 250 pounds and could run like a scared deer. This was football at its very best, changing, improving. Like everything else, the modern T was just the bright man taking something good and making it better, a great deal better. In his own way, Shaughnessy's innovation was just as revolutionary as the forward pass more than 30 years before. With the forward pass, football had begun to grow up. With the modern T, football had really come of age. On January 1st, every year, most of the country clears its head and concentrates on the city of Pasadena, California, in the Tournament of Roses. It began as a festival of flowers, but through the years, the Rose Parade has become the prelude for a contest of a very different variety. The football festival called the Rose Bowl game. After Michigan's visit of 1902, it took the West Coast 14 long years to recover. But by 1916, this postseason classic was once again being held between Eastern and Western champions. In 1923, the Rose Bowl Stadium was built, a showcase for modern football. And on its turf, some years later, there took place one of the real nightmares of all football, the wrong way run of Roy Riegels. Georgia Tech and Cal were struggling desperately in the 1929 game. Then in the second period, Cal's fine center, Roy Riegels, recovered a fumble and streaked towards the goal line. His own, that is. Had it not been for teammate Benny Lom, Riegels would have gone all the way for Georgia Tech. That just wasn't Cal's day. Georgia Tech finally won 8-7. Some 10 years later, another unforgettable moment. The Trojans of Howard Jones were very much the underdogs against unbeaten, untied, unscored upon Duke University. In the last few moments, Duke leading 3-0, an obscure quarterback from USC named Doyle Nave suddenly began to pass with deadly accuracy. He completed 4 consecutive passes. This last one gave Southern California the victory, 7-3. Usually, the patrons leave the rough stuff to the players, but every once in a while, they just can't resist getting involved. It's one thing to let off steam after a game, yet one memorable afternoon, there was a certain fan who just couldn't wait for the final gun. Here was Tom Harmon dashing down the field for his 3rd touchdown of the day. 11 men had failed to stop him. Yet one spirited anti-Michigan rooter decided he'd give it a try. And he came just as close as anyone else. That's what I call real guts. As you look back over the years, you can always pick out some of the outstanding squads. Before the turn of the century, there were Harvard, Yale, Princeton. In the early 1900s, the great Michigan teams of Fielding Yost. In the teens and 20s, Carlisle, Cornell, Pittsburgh, and Georgia Tech. And, of course, Notre Dame. In the years of the Four Horsemen, Rockne's men played the best football in the land. There were other fine teams in the 20s. Andy Smith's wonder teams from California. Then, in the late 30s, Michigan, featuring Tom Harmon, was once again in high gear. In football, no one man wins alone, and Harmon would be the first to remind us of teammates like Forrest Evashevsky, Bob Westfall, Ed Frutig, Al Wistert, and Elmer Madar. Yet Harmon was certainly the star. And here in his final game against Ohio State, we see the style and the speed that made him so famous. There were several powerhouses in 1940, Boston College, Tennessee, Nebraska, and Stanford. Shown here is the Rose Bowl game of January 1, 1941. How about that blocking? The essence of offensive football. I'm not sure where card stunts first originated. Some people claim it was UCLA or USC. I do remember them from my playing days when we traveled to Los Angeles for the Southern California game of 1928. They were just great then, and they're even better now. It's the spectacle, of course. That's part of the mass appeal. On any given Saturday afternoon, you get thrilled. Good, loud music, marching bands, and pretty girls. No wonder football's so popular. In 1946, Army was a top-ranking team again. And when they met the Irish of Notre Dame in Yankee Stadium, 85,000 people were on hand to watch it happen. This was probably the most publicized game in the history of college football. All afternoon it went back and forth. Neither side was able to score. And what a game. Blanchard, Davis, and quarterback Arnold Tucker performed most creditably for Army. For Notre Dame, Blue Jack and all his teammates gave an excellent performance. Sitko, a true All-American, put in a full afternoon. A tough afternoon. Two giants coming together, and both playing for keeps. This was rock'em, sock'em football at its very best. If one were to pick a typical great team of the 50s, the nod would probably go to Oklahoma. Squads like Oklahoma, Texas, and Michigan State typified the decade. Agility, power, modern tactics. This was football in the 50s. Someone once described football as a kind of great big public chess game, and I agree. Certainly a coach is a chess player. He confuses, he attacks, he deceives, and if he thinks harder than his opponent, he often wins. Only coaches use people for chessmen, live people. And there's the key to the whole thing, those boys. In a very real way, they're a coach's greatest achievement. That's always been the case. The score. College football owed much of its fame to sports reporters, and none is more revered than Arch Ward of the Chicago Tribune. Arch had a wonderful dream. The finest college players of each season playing the champion of the professional league. At first, it seemed like a wild sort of an idea, but after that first collision in 1934, the annual All-Star Game has become a football classic, a charity event that has featured the game's greatest stars. In 1947, We had the privilege of coaching the All-Stars against the champion Chicago Bears. We won 16-0. The man who plays football has a peculiar kind of courage. I don't just mean physical courage either. In football, you really play yourself. You test yourself all the time. And the athlete who becomes a champion is often the boy who was never quite satisfied. You know, this is what they wore at Notre Dame about 50 years ago when football was still very much in its infancy. And this is what a sports writer friend called the armor of the modern gladiator. It's beautifully designed, but it's only a package. Inside, you still have to pour an old-fashioned boy, someone who's willing to work awfully hard, be a real champion. To crown these men, Walter Camp had coined the phrase All-American, and each year helped select a team of college champions. In the years before World War I, there was perhaps no better publicized player than the All-American Indian from Carlisle, Jim Thorpe. Not only an Olympic and football hero, Thorpe won his letter in baseball and went on to play professionally. In 1925, Ernie Nevers was one of the great performers, an outstanding fullback from Stanford. In the early 30s, there was Jay Berwanger, the one-man team from Chicago. Sammy Baugh, of course. He was much more than just a great forward passer. Baugh was an accomplished football player in every department. Whizzer White from Colorado, superb football player, All-American, All-Pro, and he hasn't done badly since. First a Rhodes Scholar, and now a justice on the Supreme Court. We were playing Southern Methodist University in the Cotton Bowl in 1949. But half the time it seemed as though we were just playing Kyle Rote. So many good boys from so many schools. One of the best ever to represent Princeton University, Dick Kazmaier. And he was a Tiger, too. There was Ernie Davis from Syracuse University, unanimous All-American halfback. He had such a promising professional career ahead of him, but he was struck down by leukemia soon after graduation. A tragic loss. Notre Dame's John Hewitt was one of professional football's highest-paid bonus babies. His last college game was against Southern California in the fall of 1964. Notre Dame entered the contest unbeaten, a single triumph away from becoming national champion. At the end of the first half, the great passing combination of Hewitt to Snow had vaulted Notre Dame into a 17-0 lead. Yet, after halftime, Johnny McKay's Trojans came back like tigers, and Notre Dame found itself defending, not attacking. In the last quarter, what had seemed a certain victory was slipping away. It was one of those times when a football coach wished he'd gone into a nice, quiet business like lion taming. In the last few moments of the game, a classic forward pass by USC, and for Notre Dame, the nightmare of sudden defeat. Quite a game, football. It is just a game, at least I know it's supposed to be. But of course, it's been a lot more than that to me. When I look back, I figure I've